Fantastic. My head just keeps getting bigger. Thank you, Mark. All right, so I'm going to beg for your patience here. I don't know if y'all have traveled with young children before internationally, but I'm a little bit frazzled and low on sleep, so I jotted down some notes. All right, and first of all, I just want to thank Titus and Peter and the whole team for organizing this great event. I mean, look at the production value, everyone. This is fantastic. Let's give applause for that. Perfect. A little bit of background about myself. I've been in the Startup Society space for the last 10 years, initially founding Startup Society's Foundation, which is a nonprofit based out of the United States, really meant to bring together stakeholders like yourself, spread best practices. We're well known for the only peer-reviewed journal in the space of special jurisdictions, the Journal of Special Jurisdictions. We also published a how-to guide on how to build these things. And we've also hosted conferences like this, but honestly, I've never hosted in such a beautiful venue. But this has been fantastic. And then a couple years after that, started consulting with different special economic zone projects around the world. And one of the projects that came about is what I'm going to be talking about today. Wait, do we have a clicker? Perfect. There we go. All right. So one of the things that's been mentioned pretty consistently throughout this event is the growth of the movement. And it's apparent to anyone who's been in the space for more than 2 or 3 years, there's been steady growth. Back when I started, and a lot of the OGs, including Mark, can attest to this, and Titus, we were happy to get 50 people in a room. And when we got 300 people in a room, we thought we founded Woodstock. And now we're at a point where 300 people consistently every year here in Prague and soon in Prospera. And if you go to a network state event, you're getting 1,000+ individuals coming every year. What initially started out as a very nerdy, ideological, big ideas space is now nitty-gritty, on-the-ground work. You're having actual projects that are working, and you're having dozens and dozens of real, solid, emerging projects that are happening all the time. But when you do that, there's a little bit of an uncomfortable transition. You need to get away from purely the big ideas and the ideology, though conviction is key to any good business and any good movement. When you have an industry versus a movement, you need to develop best practices and you need to have product market fit. You need to take the tools and heuristics that startups and other companies have in order to make sure that you have a successful business. One of the heuristics that people like to use, especially in ideological spaces like this, is to answer Thiel's contrarian question, which is essentially, what is the belief you have about your individual space that your colleagues do not share? And the purpose of that is to find out what your secret is. Because his hypothesis is that every good business is built off of a secret. It is something that it has not been capitalized as an opportunity. And using that secret, you can then scale the business multiple times over. And I would probably say, and maybe some of you would agree, one of the fundamental questions about this space is when you're trying to establish a new special jurisdiction, what host country or jurisdiction should you be looking for? Oftentimes in this space, you go to places that are in the developing world, and that's fantastic. I mean, projects like Ciudad Morazon, they're really making an impact with people that are truly, truly impoverished. But when you think from first principles, what are some of the traits that you want in a jurisdiction? For one, you want to have good human capital so you can attract it, so you can develop economies and have thriving industries, ideally on the cutting edge of technology. Second, you want to have really developed capital markets because you're not going to be able to do this all with equity by itself. And even with equity, you're going to want well-developed markets. You want to be able to finance these projects. You're going to want to have a relatively a stable legal regime. Obviously, you're providing arbitrage by providing a better system. But as many people in the special jurisdiction space know, you can sometimes get into conflicts with government. And if you don't have a stable legal regime, that can be very difficult. And you also need to have some sort of decline or relative problems that governance can solve, good governance can solve. I have the answer here. USA. And when you think about it with those metrics in mind, it's not very counterintuitive. Maybe I'm not answering the question correctly. I mean, obviously, why wouldn't anyone want to set up a special jurisdiction in the United States? Yeah, that's why. Yeah, the elephant in the room. I mean, these guys can't even get a budget for the last 30 days on the most commonplace part of running a government, let alone setting up one of the most innovative jurisdictions in the world. So that's basically the reason why people have gone far and abroad to places that many people haven't even heard of, because of how difficult it is to get through these people's heads. But that's not the end of the story. There's actually a couple of different strategies that can be employed. And also, again, I might be breaking the contrarian rule again. There are people who are already working on some of these strategies, some counterintuitive ways that can create a special economic zone in the United States. So the first one, the one that you intuited, is you got to pass a law. You go to Congress, you pass a law in both chambers, get approved, not vetoed by the president, and it's implemented into statute. And because of based on the American system, it's incredibly hard to get rid of it. As we know from all the horrible programs that continue to exist, that likewise could happen potentially with a special jurisdiction. But because there's so many stakeholders, there's so many entrenched interests, and because of how strange and unintuitive the idea of special jurisdictions are in arguably one of the biggest empires in the world, and I don't mean that in a positive sense or a negative sense, it's just literal, it's very difficult to happen. So there's a couple different alternatives. One is to do it on the state level. And there's some arbitrage there. You know, the American system is based off of federalism. The idea that states are empowered with certain rights, and that's the whole voting of your feet, you know, that was largely started in the United States to a certain extent. But over the years, the 10th Amendment has been eroded, and there's been less power to the states. So the arbitrage isn't necessarily as high. Also, in terms of the political capital that you need, it's still a really high threshold. Even the smallest state in the union, which I believe is Wyoming still, there's still 300,000 residents. There's hundreds of years of businesses and special interests that, you know, you're going to be eating someone's lunch in a state when you're trying to set it up. So that's not necessarily a silver bullet. Another one, which has low political cost if you have a politically aligned executive, which in this case, Trump certainly is. He has promoted the idea of freedom cities, which are explicitly special economic zones to build new cities. And that's one of the reasons why many more entrepreneurs are heading into this space. The idea is simply through presidential decree, or what we call in the United States an executive order, you can create a regulatory sandbox purely through an executive order. And that's helpful. You can do a lot. But for legal nerds out there, what you can do is you can affect administration and on the regulatory side, but the hard code of it, what they call the statute, that can't be changed through executive order alone. And also, as Milei has used to his advantage when cutting the government, as soon as you get a new administration, afuera, that executive order is gone. So it's not exactly a permanently stable legal regime that's anti-fragile. The fourth one on this list that's sort of like the commonplace type of strategies that's a little bit more interesting and has been headed by a couple other people is the idea of an interstate compact. And it's the idea that, and it's baked right into the US Constitution, that you can have congressional level law without it necessarily having to go through both chambers. So essentially you have two states are able to make a compact, and that compact is then blessed by one of the houses of the US Congress, and that compact would have the same level as US law. So that could impact federal statute. So that would be fantastic. It has less high political capital needs as passing federal law. It has more impact than a state level. It has more longevity than an executive order. However, you have a coordination problem. You have to deal with not just one state, but two states. And you still have to have some sort of engagement with the congressional level. So it's very difficult. So here's the real answer to the contrarian question that I have. I don't think the U.S., par U.S., is the best place to set up a special jurisdiction in the United States. I think it's tribes. You know, before the United States was the United States, we were a collection of different sovereigns. And in fact, baked into the U.S. Constitution is the idea that tribes are pre-constitutional sovereigns, what they call domestic dependent nations. And this means that they have a sovereignty that is higher than, let's say, just a state. Now they have something similar to U.S. states that Congress can indeed, abrogate what they call rights of tribal people, but there's a higher threshold for that. It's based on what they call the Indian canon of construction. And essentially it means if Congress is not explicit enough about removing the rights of tribal peoples to govern themselves or govern the non-Indians that are on their reservation, those rights are assumed to be retained by the tribal sovereign. Let me give you an example of this. Many outside the United States probably haven't heard of this case, but there was a case in Oklahoma in 2020, I believe, McGirt. And essentially, there was 100 years prior, Congress kind of got rid of the reservation. Oklahoma also passed laws that got rid of the rights of tribal peoples in Oklahoma to have reservations. And if you know anything about Oklahoma, it's basically Indian country. But in 2020, because of the plethora of different legal understandings that have been built up over the years about tribal sovereignty, the new court established, well, Congress wasn't explicit enough. We have to give 40% of Oklahoma to the tribes. And that's what happened. And you see that all the time in these different cases. There's tremendous opportunity in legal ambiguities, especially ambiguities that do not address tribal sovereigns, that can allow for tremendous jurisdictional arbitrage. So in a sense, they're kind of states plus. Here's a way that tribes are also additionally stronger than states in creating arbitrage, and it's the idea of the plenary authority of Congress. By the way, I'm sorry for the legal lecture I'm giving right now, but this is important. So basically, it's the plenary authority essentially means only Congress has the authority to govern tribes. So not agencies, not the executive branch. So that essentially means executive orders don't apply in Indian country. That you can't say that with a state, but you can have an area unless it explicitly mentions a statute that involves Native American tribes, it wouldn't apply. That can have some interesting side effects for the Trump tariffs, by the way. So what are the strategic advantages in addition to the legal advantages of a tribal special economic zone? Well, for one, the political capital needed is significantly smaller, and I mean really small. There are some tribes that we've engaged with that have 100 members and 4-person legislatures. And these are areas that almost have had no business on reservation. There is no entrenched interest in many of these areas. I mean, obviously there's cultural significance and there's lots of family background that is always something to contend with, but relatively speaking, when you're talking about a state or on the federal level, it is significant, there's significantly less complexity there. And also, what this has the ability to do is you're able to more strategically go and do those 4 different things, including the interstate compact. A lot easier is if you first start with a tribal special economic zone as your MVP, your minimally viable product. You're able to negotiate with the federal government more, whether that's federal regulatory agencies and what have you, because they're required to correspond quickly with tribal nations. Also, they already have established relationships with state legislatures and are important stakeholders, so they're more easily able to negotiate with those states to form an interstate compact. So basically, from day one, you have the same authority as a U.S. state plus, and that you have the ability more easily than any other method, I would argue, to be able to get a federal level special economic zone, essentially a U.S. Hong Kong. So we've already done this. We had a pilot. I'm the founder of the first special economic zone in the United States. How this came about is I was doing consulting work with a variety of different firms, and one of the projects that came across my desk was with the Catawba Indian Nation. And initially, like probably many of you, I thought, well, they're paper tigers. Obviously, they were conquered. They don't have any real authority. But I did some research in the pre-ChatGPT days, and I realized something. They do have true. Really? 1 minute. Okay, I'll go through this very quick. Okay, so we made one. We passed a law back in 2022 after engaging with the legislature, and we created a regulatory body, a management company, a statute with its own commercial code based similarly off of Prospera. And we created a banking commission that you can charter a financial institution, you can incorporate a company. And now we're scaling all across Indian country. So we're focusing on physical industries as well as digital industries. And based on the progress that we've had in the last couple weeks, I think there's a real possibility that Q4, meaning next 3 months, or early Q1, we pass 1 or 2 more special economic zone legislations and implement new special economic zones. Some of them are right next to the largest US cities in the United States in terms of economic output. So we're very excited about that. Final point right here. Okay. So why United States? To a certain extent, everything that we're talking about has been built by the American Revolution. That sounds very chauvinistic, and I get that. But where do we get in our historical memory the heroism and the value that we see in creating new jurisdictions? I would argue that the historical imprint has largely come from the United States and its effort to create new jurisdictions. That sort of feeling of destiny, I think it comes from there. So I believe there is a karmic type of inevitability of this. And whether you believe that the United States is going down or whether the United States is rising up, in either case, you're going to need special jurisdictions. Either you need to create new Venices and Florences to safeguard the secrets of the empire, or you need to create enclaves of the future for the new global order. So what we need people with courage and strategy to make it happen, and I'm glad to be surrounded by those people today. Thank you so much.